March 7, 1945. Remagen Bridge, Germany. Oberst Heinrich Müller stood among the captured American equipment, his hands trembling as he held the production plate from a knocked-out Sherman tank. Built by Chrysler Corporation, Detroit Arsenal, Michigan. July 1944. The date was 8 months ago. This wasn't battlefield salvage or a prototype. This was mass production on a scale that defied comprehension. Around him lay dozens more Shermans, each bearing similar plates from factories he'd never heard of. Fisher Body, Ford Motor Company, Pressed Steel Car Company, Pacific Car and Foundry. American automobile manufacturers had become tank builders, and they'd done it faster than Germany could respond. What Müller didn't know was that the tank under his hand was one of 120,000 armored vehicles built in a single American state. Michigan alone had outproduced the entire Third Reich. The factory that stamped that plate had been building Plymouths 3 years earlier. Now it delivered 400 tanks per month with precision that exceeded German military standards. The mathematics were impossible, yet the evidence surrounded him. America hadn't just mobilized for war, it had industrialized destruction itself. The seeds of Germany's armored defeat were planted not in Berlin or Moscow, but in Dearborn and Detroit, where Henry Ford had revolutionized manufacturing. In 1940, the United States Army possessed just 400 tanks, most obsolete. German panzer divisions were crushing France with 2,500 modern tanks backed by years of development and doctrine. The Wehrmacht's confidence was absolute. American military production was dismissed as negligible, their industrial capacity wasted on consumer goods, their workers soft from prosperity. Hermann Goering told his staff in June 1940 that Americans knew how to build refrigerators, not weapons. They have no military tradition of mass armaments production. Converting automobile factories to tank production would take years, perhaps a decade. By then, the war will be over. German intelligence agreed. A September 1940 assessment calculated that America might produce 5,000 tanks annually by 1943 if they completely militarized their economy. Even that seemed optimistic for a democracy that couldn't command its industries. What the Germans failed to understand was that American automobile production had created the world's most sophisticated manufacturing infrastructure. Detroit wasn't building cars. It was perfecting mass production itself. The techniques that put 15 million Model Ts on the road would now put 50,000 tanks on battlefields. The transformation began with a phone call. On May 28, 1940, William Knudsen, president of General Motors, received a request from President Roosevelt. The former Danish immigrant, who'd risen to lead America's largest corporation, was asked to serve his adopted nation for $1 per year. Knudsen's task was impossible by European standards: transform civilian industry into military production without destroying either. Within days, Knudsen was meeting with Chrysler's K.T. Keller, Ford's Edsel Ford, and dozens of other automotive executives. The question wasn't whether they could build tanks. It was how fast they could start. The Chrysler Corporation's response revealed American industrial character. Presented with blueprints for the M3 medium tank in June 1940, Chrysler engineers studied the design for 2 weeks. Then they did something Germans never anticipated. They redesigned it for mass production. The Army wanted 1,000 tanks. Chrysler asked what they'd do with 10,000. Construction of the Detroit Arsenal tank plant began in September 1940 on farmland in Warren, Michigan. The facility would cover 113 acres under one roof. German intelligence dismissed reports of this construction as propaganda exaggeration. No tank factory in Europe exceeded 30 acres. The Americans were clearly lying about their capabilities. They weren't lying. By April 1941, 7 months after breaking ground, the Detroit Arsenal produced its first M3 Grant tank. By September, production reached 200 tanks monthly. By December 1941, when America entered the war, the single factory was outproducing all German tank plants combined. The assembly line that emerged inside the Detroit arsenal was unlike anything in European military production. Automotive techniques transformed tank building from craft to industry. Subassemblies were manufactured by hundreds of suppliers across Michigan. Fisher Body built hulls. Cadillac produced engines. Buick manufactured transmissions. Final assembly in Warren brought components together with precision that German factories couldn't match. The production statistics that emerged from Michigan defied German comprehension. The Detroit arsenal alone would produce 22,234 tanks during the war. But it was just one facility. Ford's River Rouge complex converted to build M4A3 Shermans with Ford GAA engines. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc tank arsenal produced 11,352 M4A2 Shermans. Chrysler expanded beyond Warren, adding the nearby defense plant, producing engines and components. By 1943, Michigan was completing 1,500 tanks monthly. Germany's peak production across all factories was 1,850 tanks monthly. The human transformation matched the industrial miracle. The Detroit arsenal employed 10,000 workers at peak, 60% of them women who'd never seen a factory before Pearl Harbor. Rose Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, worked at the Willow Run bomber plant, but thousands more like her assembled tanks at Warren. These women achieved precision that German master craftsmen struggled to match. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, welds that exceeded military specifications, quality control that rejected components German factories would have accepted eagerly. German prisoners of war working in American factories provided the most damning testimony. Obergefreiter Karl Schmidt, captured in Tunisia and assigned to a Michigan parts manufacturer, wrote in a monitored letter, "I work alongside women who produce components faster and more accurately than our crop workers. They have no military training, no engineering background. Yet their output exceeds our best. The Americans have mechanized human capability itself." The Sherman tank that emerged from Michigan assembly lines embodied American production philosophy. It wasn't the best tank technically. German Panthers had superior armor and guns, but Shermans had something Panthers lacked. They existed in overwhelming numbers. For every Panther Germany produced, America built 5 Shermans. When Panthers broke down, rare parts took weeks to arrive. When Shermans failed, entire replacement tanks arrived within days. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated what Michigan's production meant in combat. Germany launched its final offensive with carefully hoarded tanks, each one irreplaceable. American forces lost hundreds of tanks in the initial assault. Within 2 weeks, every loss was replaced. New Shermans arrived directly from ports still bearing Detroit Arsenal production tags. German tank commanders who destroyed 5 American tanks in one engagement faced 10 more the next day. The mathematics of industrial warfare had rendered tactical excellence irrelevant. Major General F.W. von Mellenthin, German staff officer, wrote after the war that the American system of tank production was the decisive factor in Germany's defeat. They didn't build better tanks. They built more tanks than we could destroy. Every Panther we produced, through incredible effort and limited resources, faced 5 Shermans built in factories that simultaneously produced trucks, jeeps, and aircraft engines. We were fighting an industrial base we couldn't comprehend. Beyond tanks, Michigan produced the components of mechanized warfare. Detroit's factories built 75% of America's aircraft engines. They produced millions of trucks, the vehicles that kept armies mobile when German forces returned to horse-drawn wagons. They manufactured ammunition, weapons, and thousands of other military necessities. The state that had put America on wheels now put Allied armies on tracks. The post-war accounting revealed the magnitude of Michigan's contribution. From the state's factories came 120,000 armored vehicles, 4.2 million engines, 2.4 million trucks, and 28,000 aircraft. This single state outproduced the entire Axis alliance in multiple categories. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant alone exceeded Italy's total tank production. General Motors' Michigan facilities surpassed Japan's entire military vehicle output. When Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, learned the true scale of American production during his Nuremberg interrogation, he sat in silence for several minutes. Then he spoke. "We knew America was industrial. We didn't know they could transform that industry so completely, so quickly. Your automobile factories became arsenals faster than we could build new tank plants. We were obsolete before we started. The workers who achieved this transformation returned to civilian life having changed warfare forever. They'd proven that democracy could mobilize resources totalitarianism couldn't match, that free workers could outproduce slave labor, that American industry could bury enemies under an avalanche of production. The assembly lines that built Shermans resumed building Chevrolets and Fords, but the lesson remained. When challenged, American industry could transform itself into an unstoppable force. Oberst Heinrich Müller, standing among the captured tanks at Remagen, finally understood what Germany had faced. Every Sherman he'd destroyed was replaced within days. Every tactical victory was drowned in strategic abundance. The factory names stamped on American equipment told the real story of defeat. Chrysler, Ford, General Motors. These weren't military contractors. They were America's industrial heartland, and they'd built the instruments of Germany's destruction with the same efficiency they'd once built family cars. Michigan didn't just contribute to Allied victory. It made victory inevitable through production capacity that rendered German resistance futile. The arsenal of democracy wasn't in Washington or on battlefields. It was in Detroit, Warren, Grand Blanc, and Dearborn, where assembly lines that had motorized America now mechanized its victory, where workers who'd built the cars that defined prosperity built the tanks that delivered freedom. The Third Reich had challenged the world's greatest industrial power and discovered too late that wars of production cannot be won by courage alone. Detroit built 120,000 tanks, and in doing so, built the foundation of victory that no amount of German tactical brilliance could overcome.